Have you ever stopped to think about the invisible logic that keeps our world running? You know, the fundamental rules that stop bridges from collapsing and make sure the software on your phone doesn't, well, explode. Today, we're diving deep into that core logic. It's a way of thinking called first principles, and it's basically the hidden blueprint for how we build a safer world.
Think about it. Every time a new technology comes along, whether it's self-driving cars or a new form of AI, we're faced with this huge question. When is it safe enough? Where do we draw that line between incredible innovation and a risk we just can't accept? It's not a simple question, but the answer starts by breaking the problem down to its most basic, fundamental parts. Let's see how it's done.
All right, so first things first, what exactly are these first principles? We've got to go right back to the foundation to understand this. Okay, so a first principle is basically a core truth. It's like an atom of an idea. You just can't break it down any further. It isn't based on anything else. It is the starting point. You can think of it as the absolute bedrock that all other knowledge gets built on.
And you know, this isn't some new age productivity hack. This idea is ancient. We're talking all the way back to Aristotle. He called it the first basis from which a thing is known. It's all about stripping away every assumption until you're left with only what is undeniably true.
So that's the philosophy. But how do we take this ancient idea and actually use it? How does it become a practical method for thinking?
It's really a beautiful two-step dance. Step one, you deconstruct. You take a really messy, complex problem, and you just shatter it into its most basic, fundamental truths. Step two, you reconstruct. You build your solution back up from scratch, but this time, you only use those essential truths as your building blocks.
Now let's see how this plays out in the real world, specifically in engineering, where the stakes can literally be life and death. This is where first principles really shine.
Thinking this way forces you to make really important distinctions. Take safety versus security. When we're talking about safety, we're basically looking at the odds of an accident happening. But with security, we add a whole new variable to the equation, a person, an intentional attacker. That one little change completely transforms how you have to build your defenses.
So, from this way of thinking, we get these incredibly powerful universal principles. The first one is fail-safe design. The idea here is simple. You have to assume failure is going to happen. It's inevitable. So you design your system so that when it does fail, it defaults to a safe state. The classic example is a railway signal that automatically turns red if the power cuts out. Simple, but brilliant.
Next up, we've got safety margins. Engineers are not optimists. They know the real world is messy and unpredictable, so they build in buffers. The cable on an elevator isn't just strong enough to hold the maximum weight. Oh no, it's designed to hold way more, giving you a huge margin of safety for all the weird, unexpected stresses that might happen.
And then there's one of my favorites, defense in depth. The core idea is just so smart. Never, ever rely on a single point of failure. Instead, you build layers, multiple, independent layers of protection, just like the walls and moats of a medieval castle. If an attacker gets through one layer, there's another one waiting. This is the guiding principle behind everything from nuclear power plants to cybersecurity.
But you know, building things with safety margins and fail-safes, that's only half the battle. The really hard questions aren't about physics and math. They're about morality. And that's where we get into the ethics of risk.
And this is absolutely crucial. Deciding what's safe enough is never just a technical calculation. It's a value judgment through and through. It's a conversation about what we as a society truly value, what harms we're willing to accept in exchange for a benefit, and what principles of fairness we refuse to compromise on.
So how do regulators make these massive, world-changing decisions? Well, they don't just guess. They rely on a structured ethical framework, a set of about 10 key principles designed to guide them through this moral maze. This framework forces them to ask some really deep questions. It's not just about minimizing harm. It's about asking, are the risks and benefits being shared fairly? Is the decision-making process transparent? And maybe most importantly, are the people who will be most affected by this risk actually getting a voice in the conversation? And this leads us to a really sharp distinction we have to make. On one hand, you have social acceptance, which is really just what a society is willing to put up with right now. But on the other, you have ethical acceptability, which is a much, much higher bar. That asks what is morally right, what's just and fair, not just for us, but for the generations that come after us.
So you've got these hard-nosed engineering principles and these deep ethical frameworks. How does all of that get translated into the actual policies and rules that govern our world?
Well, that's where we get something called risk acceptance criteria. That's the technical term, but you can just think of them as the official rules of the road. They are the clear, concrete lines that define the boundary between a risk we're willing to live with and one that is simply intolerable.
And the ethical idea propping all of this up is incredibly powerful. At its very core is this belief that every person has a moral right not to be exposed to risk without their consent, unless, and this is the key part, unless it's part of a fair and equitable system that shares the benefits with the very people who are bearing that risk.
And that brings us full circle, right back to today. Technology is accelerating at a dizzying pace. Things like AI, genetic engineering, they're pushing the absolute boundaries of what's possible, and they are challenging our oldest and deepest assumptions about safety and ethics. So the question we have to leave you with is this. Are our first principles, this ancient, powerful logic, are they strong enough to guide us through the wild, unprecedented future that's rushing toward us?